Vera had been on a winning streak for several years. She didn't know why God had rewarded her with such happiness. Perhaps it was her kindness, modesty, sensitivity, responsiveness, or patience. If you think about it, she deserved happiness in this life. And she had a good husband. Valera had no bad habits. He earned a good income and was a good son. He always helped his mother and told Vera that his mother was sacred to him. The young woman also valued such sacred things. Parents should be respected and cherished while they were alive. If help is needed, then, of course, you can't refuse. Valera's mother didn't need much help, although things weren't exactly easy for her. She lived with her grandmother, that is, with her mother, and dutifully fulfilled her duty as a good daughter, caring for her. She took her in as soon as she began to complain of ill health. The grandmother's spare apartment was sold, and her mother-in-law renovated hers to make it comfortable for an elderly, infirm person. That's how they lived. Even before their wedding, Vera knew that her future husband had an ailing grandmother, and that he would mobilize all his strength to help her if necessary. The young woman even met Angelina Vassilievna, even before her beloved introduced her to his mother. It so happened that on the day they met, the future mother-in-law ran off to visit a friend who was hospitalized. They sat with the grandmother, and Vera realized she had a difficult personality. She sympathized with Angelina Vassilievna's daughter. It must have been hard for her. The grandmother didn't require much care, even though she was elderly, but she did some things around the house herself. Later, Vera met her future mother-in-law, Milana Alexandrovna. She turned out to be more gentle, and the young woman liked her. Valera's mother welcomed his beloved. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. And the young couple spent their first year of married life quite happily. They adjusted, like everyone else, but there were no major woes. They had enough for living, for vacations, and for helping her mother-in-law. But then Vera's good fortune ended. Things started to fall apart from all sides. Work became more demanding, and she and her husband began arguing more often. His grandmother fell ill, and his mother found it difficult to care for her. His mother-in-law took time off and tried to find a caregiver, but it was all over. Vacations ended quickly, and the caregiver had to pay a lot of money. Even with her son's help, she couldn't afford it. Milana Alexandrovna didn't want to pay such exorbitant sums to a stranger. How could anyone trust just any caregiver? And her mother complained that she was being treated unfairly. Her mother-in-law tried to cope on her own, meaning she didn't hire anyone or quit her job, but only accepted her son's help. But she was still exhausted and constantly complained that it was hard for her. She didn't have time for anything, and all the money went on medicine, diapers, food, and utilities. I go to work like a homeless person, she cried. I have no time to look after myself. I don't see the point of such an existence. Quote. Vera genuinely felt sorry for her, but her husband was restless, trying to find the best solution for everyone. And without consulting his wife, he found it. He presented her with the fact that his mother and grandmother would live with them. For Vera, this proposal was completely unexpected. She also wanted to say something about it. She also has a lot of work. Her apartment is not unlimited. It's large, but it has 2 rooms. Where can we fit 2 more women here? Well, Mom can sleep in the living room, her husband answered calmly. And Grandma in the bedroom. She snores, and they can't share a bedroom. Mom needs rest too. Quote. Vera said they needed to think about it, but her husband objected. Vera was completely taken aback by this proposal. She, too, wanted to have something to say about it. She had a lot of work to do, and the apartment wasn't exactly spacious, just a two-room apartment, big enough to accommodate 2 women. Vera said they needed to think about it, but her husband objected. It's not a proposal, it's a fact. He'll be taking his mother and grandmother with them. Quote. It all made sense. It would be easier for his family, since they, along with Vera, would be able to help. And his mother would rent out her apartment, which would provide extra income since she'd have to quit her job. There was no other way, she couldn't cope. She'd been living like this for 3 months already. If things continued like this, she'd simply retire. Vera had no choice, she had to accept it. The situation had developed in such a way that it was impossible to object. And within a week, her husband had moved his mother and bedridden grandmother into her apartment. For Valera, everything was simple. They were one family, everything was shared. He didn't see a problem with this decision. His wife's apartment was practically his. He had a say in the matter too. What was so hard to argue with? He couldn't stop helping his family. Her husband's logic was ironclad, even if it was unsettling. Over a year ago, they had vowed to be together through thick and thin. The words, which had seemed romantic at their wedding, now took on concrete meaning. We've had a year of fun, now we need to tighten up a bit, Valera would say, shrugging. The 4 of them began living together, and it wasn't exactly a nightmare, but it was terribly inconvenient. There was barely room to move around in the apartment. Wherever you went, you bumped into your mother-in-law. Milana Alexandrovna was restless. She'd sit in the kitchen talking on the phone with friends, turn on the TV in the living room and lie on the couch, or relax in the bathroom. To keep her grandmother entertained, she always had the TV on in the background. And for quick communication with the rest of the world, a bell was placed under her arm. Her mother-in-law was proud of her innovation. This way, she didn't have to constantly check on her grandmother. Angelina Vasilyevna used the bell quite often and at any time of day. Vera could already hear the ringing in her ears, but she didn't complain. It was truly convenient for her mother-in-law. Vera was more upset about something else. She had to do all the housework, including cooking, because Milana Alexandrovna didn't have enough time for such chores. Even though her mother-in-law didn't work, she didn't have time for anything. She supposedly looked after her grandmother around the clock, and it took a lot of her energy. What she did all day to be so tired was a mystery to her daughter-in-law. After all, her grandmother didn't constantly need to be turned, washed, and fed. And wasn't this bell meant to make Milana Alexandrovna's life easier? And because Vera saw it when she came home from work, she didn't notice her mother-in-law was overworked. She rested more and complained about how busy she was all day. In the evenings, Valera sometimes sat with his grandmother and helped her sit up on a pillow. Okay, so her mother-in-law always washed her and changed her diapers. But that was 3 times a day at most. And Milana Alexandrovna didn't bother with washing her. She said her mother didn't like it. She'd just wipe her down and that was it. Vera believed her mother-in-law could at least do some other things around the house. Yes, they moved in with them so they could help, but not so they could completely shoulder most of the expenses and household chores. The young woman tried to get her husband to at least have her cook or clean occasionally. But Valera was dissatisfied with such requests. We should be helping them, not them serving us, he complained. So, cooking and cleaning fell on the daughter-in-law. But unlike her mother-in-law, she worked, and very hard. She had to stay late at work. She couldn't get everything done either. She cooked more food so the family wouldn't go hungry if she arrived late. And she had to wash everyone's dishes. Mom is tired, the husband always noted, warning his wife not to disturb her rest. Grandma bothers her day and night. She needs to use every minute to rest. But Vera, too, would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of the bell and also not get enough sleep. But her fatigue was not taken into account. She was young, she had plenty of energy. And that was all. The daughter-in-law's objections were ignored, and she even stopped cooking. It's not embarrassing to say, but everyone was waiting for the old woman to rest in peace. Although Angelina Vasilievna wasn't happy with this life either, she was in no hurry to go to the next world. She was picky about the food, asking for Nevera to be called to explain the best way to cook buckwheat and make dumplings. Vera, we've made our own dumplings our whole lives, and you only eat store-bought ones. Take a pen and write down how to make the dough properly, Grandma told her young daughter-in-law. Yes, but I don't have time. I know how to make pelmeni, Vera sighed wearily. And she listened as Angelina Vasilievna talked about how big families were in her youth and how the women managed to do everything. And ready-made pelmeni weren't for sale. They even made their own noodles and dried them in the sun. Vera rolled her eyes. It's a good thing she didn't have to make the noodles herself, otherwise she'd hang them on the balcony. She had enough of what her mother-in-law hung for her about being busy. It turned out that her mother-in-law and her mother lived off the young couple and saved their own money. Milana Alexandrovna managed her mother's pension and the income from the rent of her apartment. She didn't buy groceries and didn't pay utilities. Vera thought her mother-in-law was actively saving money to build her apartment. But somehow she found out otherwise. She accidentally overheard her mother-in-law on the phone, where she was telling her friend that it was good that she kicked the tenants out of her apartment. You know, it's like a weight off my shoulders, she said happily. It's good that she checked in time, otherwise the apartment would have been burned down by some alcoholics. It turned out that her tenants were outwardly okay and worked, but liked to drink and invited company. And the landlady was not happy with this. She told her friend that she would no longer rent out her apartment, there was no point. She had enough to live on. Her son and daughter-in-law were working, and she was already stressed out without tenants. Vera assumed that this had happened recently, and her mother-in-law would tell her about her unsuccessful attempt to rent out the apartment. But Milana Alexandrovna remained silent. Moreover, she periodically complained that some problems constantly arose with the tenants. She had to go there and check on them. Maybe it would be better not to rent out the apartment then. The daughter-in-law tried to give her a chance to tell the truth. But the mother-in-law didn't take advantage of this opportunity, instead looking at Vera with disapproval. She said, it's her salary, she can't refuse the extra income. The daughter-in-law didn't say anything, she already had enough problems. She'd also say that she was eavesdropping, it's none of her business, and she'd definitely play on her pity. Vera, in principle, understood that renting out the apartment was like a lottery, and there were good renovations that had been done relatively recently. It would be a shame if something was ruined. For example, she wasn't ready to rent out her apartment either, so she wouldn't judge others. Well, okay, the money or the fact that there was too much space in one apartment would be fine. But Vera was practically being driven around, and her husband began to make increasingly more frequent complaints against her, indignant that she didn't do enough around the house. And you don't cook for everyone, Valera once said. Why the hell do we need you here anyway? The wife looked at her husband with wide eyes. Actually, she's in her apartment. She lived peacefully and managed everything. And now he's dragged his entire family here, and she's the only one doing anything around the house. And she also has to listen to his reproaches and those of his grandmother. Thank goodness her mother-in-law is silent, otherwise Vera would definitely have sent the whole trio packing. Vera has been wanting this for a while now. Intimacy with her husband has dwindled, her mother-in-law is running around, checking everything. Granny with her bell. Everyone finds time to relax, and she's the one who has to keep things in order and ensure there's food, as her husband put it. And after his latest statement, she realized she'd had enough and decided to tell everyone to go to hell. Vera waited until the weekend, when her husband and mother-in-law had their traditional trip to the market, and then she took action. Frankly, she hated weekends, especially Saturdays, because they also hung her grandmother on it. It had become an unbearable routine. Every Saturday it was always the same. Her husband and mother-in-law would go to the market, and Vera would stay home. She had to cook dinner for the whole family and constantly be on hand to help her elderly relative. Her grandmother would call her for any reason, to get water, to straighten a pillow, to change the TV settings. Vera couldn't concentrate on cooking, interrupting herself every 10 minutes. After all, she wanted to go to the market too. She dreamed of picking out fresh fruit herself. She especially loved peaches and cherries, but no one took her wishes into account. Her opinion was ignored, as if she were invisible in her own home. When she asked to buy something, her requests were ignored, her husband's standard answer forgotten. Sometimes, if it was food that everyone in the family ate, the purchase was made, but Vera got almost nothing. Such weekends turned into real trials. Vera felt like a servant, not a member of the family. Her needs were of no concern to anyone. She cooked, cleaned, took care of her grandmother, and in return, she didn't receive even simple gratitude, only fatigue and disappointment. But this time she would put an end to it. She had been preparing for several days. As soon as her husband and mother-in-law left, she ordered a special transport for her grandmother and collected their things, and at the same time called a locksmith to change the lock. Vera wasn't an insensitive person, but any kind person can be driven to despair. She made sure that everything was all right with Angelina Vasilyevna. A nurse, whose services she also paid, drove her to her mother-in-law's apartment. It wasn't much, but it was an investment in her peaceful future. She didn't want to see these ungrateful people in her apartment anymore. When everything was done, she called her husband and told him to take his mother from the market not to her apartment, but to her mother-in-law's apartment. Grandma and their things were already waiting for them there. And Vera would file for divorce. In this situation, she only felt sorry for her grandmother, and not much even that. Angelina Vasilyevna, a mean old woman, managed to boss around and ruin the impression. The husband had to agree with his wife's decision. She presented him with a fait accompli, just as he did with his grandmother, so he has nothing to complain about. Thank you for listening to the end of this story. Please support the channel with a like. It won't be difficult for you, and it's very important to me. Until next time.